Sight and Insight podcast with me, Judy Curtis, and of course the lovely Lorwyn Nagel, known to her intimates as Connie, and the lovely David Curtis, known to his friends as David. Hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. I'm still recovering from all the washing up, but it was a very pleasant time, and we are thankful for all the things that we have around us, friends, family, and lots of good art on the walls. So I'm extremely unready for this because I thought we were going to be talking about spontaneity in art, and I've just been told as we're sitting down at the microphone that no, we're going to be talking about Gestalt theory. So as I know nothing about that, I'm going to hand over to Connie almost immediately so that our resident psychologist can give us some idea about what Gestalt means, whether I'm pronouncing it correctly, and how it applies to the art world. So, take it away, Connie.
All right, Judy. So, Gestalt is a German word for meaning form. It is interpreted as form or shape. Mm-hmm. And it's an organizing, Gestalt has been, there's a whole Gestalt psychology that came up in the 50s, and it's coming from the idea that natural systems and their properties should be viewed as wholes. Mm-hmm. WHOLES.
Okay.
And that the mind also tends to even take disorganized things in its, in our view, and organize them, because it's sort of a way of taking a chaotic world and putting it into some sense of meaning.
Okay.
For us humans. So that's how I would start it.
well, so it does apply a lot to painting.
I agree. Yes.
And it is a philosophy or a psychology?
Well, there's something called Gestalt psychology.
Oh.
And I would not say that Gestalt is a philosophy, but it has definitely taken on it has followers, and there was a guy, I hope I'm saying this right, that it's Fritz Perl is the one that really got into, and it was in the 60s that he got into Gestalt. And meaning that what you wanted to do was it was sort of empathic too in the process. So he would repeat back something that somebody said to them. Let's say he said, you come to your therapist and say, I'm so distressed about my family, and Fritz Perls would say, you're so distressed about your family. And in the process of feeding this back to the person receives yet again another element of meaning to what they just said. So
because his question was an answer.
Yeah, well, and also it came back with the same amount of material. So in painting, let's say that we do the same thing, that we might. We look at a scene before, and then we interpret that scene on our canvas, and then I think the whole process is a matter of trying to, and we may say that's where we want to complete that piece. So how do we complete that piece? How do we make the dismembered pieces of it, the disorganized pieces, come together? And those may be color notes as we talk about it, or they may be the line and design, or the lines that how can we bring them together? So if I did like for instance, you and I, that David and I did a demo together, and I did all these squiggles on the piece, and then I said, okay, now you try to make it something. And he had to come in and make it a piece, a piece that is meaningful, that carries, that other people would say, oh, he did it this salt marsh or whatever. So
Right, and we had talked about it, to be fair
Right.
to people listening, that we had talked about what generally I had in mind. But we had experimented with this once before, whereas I think we were up on Cadillac Mountain, and you made
Yes.
an abstract, just a linear design, and I saw where you got it from, and I could see it from nature. So I was able to, and as you like to say, you want to keep the line throughout the whole process. That one line in design, you want it to sort of summarize the beginnings, but it has to be there in the end, because that was the motion in the painting.
and it's almost the skeleton
Right.
of the piece.
But it was part of the Gestalt.
Yeah,
It was heading for
exactly.
the Gestalt. So it's a good way of testing your Gestalt theory, is that to see if you have that continuous line from beginning to end.
Yeah, and it also, if you're keeping and maintaining the thing that you wanted to maintain, there are several principles involved in what we're calling the Gestalt. Especially, I would place these on what we're doing as painters. And one is the figure ground, which refers to the relationship between an object and its surroundings.
Yeah.
You know, so do you see the figure in front of you, or do you see the background first?
Right.
You know, so there's one of the Gestalt things. Like, in that process, are you wanting to bring that background forward, which would actually be kind of counterintuitive? But you could probably get away with doing something like that if you could create a Gestalt in that painting that allows the viewer to stay with that background first before
Yeah,
the
I mean,
figure.
I could imagine a solo figure just walking in a field, and there was a dramatic sky behind them, or a big rainbow coming out of a black cloud, and they were just sort of at one, and you did see them, but your eye is drawn to, as you say, the background. So I think it's the unity. It's putting together all these principles in painting, like you said, and it seems to, I mean, the whole idea that the definition was about form is really fascinating.
Yeah.
So it just
Gestalt actually means form or
Right.
shape.
yeah.
You know.
So I think that says it all. That when we're painting a scene, I think it is the form. Let's remember, a lot of people think form is the object.
Yeah.
And
that's
form is
exactly.
also the space, as you pointed out, the space between the objects.
Yeah.
Is form too.
Or
You
the
have to make it-
background,
right, you have to make it look like it's not important, but it's important because it has to be there.
Yeah, yeah.
So you have to figure out a way of keeping it subtle and out of the way for the sake of something else.
Yeah.
And so it's a good way of judging your own painting, I would take it.
I think so. Now, another principle in the Gestalt idea is closure. And closure means keeping the viewer involved by so the viewer must complete the image or form that they see in your painting. And that harkens to the lost and found idea. See, so if you've got, if you lose, let's say that you have a tree in front of you. So I'm thinking about a painting that David just did, and he was showing me. And so this tree's in front of us. If it's too cut out and has no lost and found edges, then the viewer is already given all the information necessary to say that's a tree. But what happens is it doesn't keep my interest as a viewer. So I lose interest and I leave the painting.
Interesting, yeah.
So what you want to do is keep the viewer involved by the viewer must complete the image or form.
Right.
And that's part of the Gestalt.
And just to be, everybody realize that one of the things we're doing is critiques. We're having critiques here at our house, and Connie and I are running these critiques, and by constantly critiquing, you can over critique things, but on the same token, it sharpens your sense of the so-called right and wrong in a painting.
I agree.
And the beauty of painting is this, it's not a right and wrong in the sense, in the moral sense or the figurative sense, but much more
Or even in
the appearance of things, the musicality of things in a sense that note just sounded like it was off, and so we're using the Gestalt theory a lot as our overseer to critiquing a painting. It must find the Gestalt, it must find the unity or the oneness, and if it doesn't have it, we have to figure out what's holding it back from that. And you learn a ton by doing this. I mean, Connie critiques my paintings with this in mind, and it really helps. Yeah. And I critique her paintings, and Judy's learning a ton from the two of us yelling at each other.
It's fascinating. So, am I right in thinking then, is this something to do with the idea that when you talk about a painting should have variety within unity, and therefore you can have details, but they've all got to relate to the oneness.
Right.
So
if you have a detail that doesn't get along with the whole, that should be taken out.
Yeah.
The Gestalt should be greater than the. What does Aristotle say? The parts are equal to the sum of total of its whole.
Well, no, it's supposed to be greater.
The parts are greater than the sum of its.
The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Is what it's supposed to be.
See, that's why we have Connie in the.
Yeah. So, but all right then. So, can you have too much unity? If everything is so unified, does that mean there's no, the balance is so perfect that you lose the interest in it?
Right. So that's the Gestalt would say, and I think Connie's pointing out with all these different steps that you take into consideration. Yes, that has to be if there's not a dominance and a subordinate in a painting. Yeah. And if the dominant doesn't work, I mean, hypothetically, it's a portrait of a figure, and the title is Happiness, and she looks like she's ready to break into tears. I don't think that's in the sync. It doesn't go along with the harmony of what they're trying to do. So the subordinate, which might be a background of a sunset or something like that, might be overpowering, might be more dramatic than the smile on the figure, and that would be okay.
Well, and that's part of the Gestalt, I think, when we're talking about. The other thing I was going to say is that because there are some principles of Gestalt, so there's another one that's called continuance, and it means that the viewer has a tendency to follow along a path or a river. I just finished a painting that has a river in it, and this is a compositional element that allows the viewer to enter and leave your piece. So we all, as painters, need to think about that all the time, don't you think? Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting. Connie looked at me and said, "David, does that lie down?" And I thought that's interesting that Connie would see it from the concept of, does the painting feel like, it's a river going back into space? Does it look like it was a river lying down? Did it look like it was all in the same perspective, you might say?
Yeah.
And it certainly did. But I thought that was interesting that the feeling is brought into the Gestalt, the form. You said, did it lie down? Did it have the perspective as if you were looking at something lying down?
Yeah.
And that's the way I took that. And I thought it was
because if it wasn't lying down,
right,
then it would be disconcerting for me,
right,
and the overall Gestalt would be interrupted
because the feeling was about that little river that carved itself out over the years.
It was carving itself out, exactly. And then there was a mountain in the background and all that. I was also going to mention that one of the other kind of the final thing that that if your composition is off sometimes, and I'm thinking about a painting that you did, David, that was at the Granite Pier. So it is that you can change things. So you might suffer from what they call proximity flaws. So sometimes we lose the third dimension or the depth of a painting. You know, we may have something like a salt marsh there, and we've got even the, you know, hog islands in the background, and we've got then the clouds and everything. But somehow we lose that depth. So the way we can take that into 3 dimensions again is maybe by putting a tree right in the front. It reminds me, one of the paintings that you did this summer was Granite Pier, and you put that pole right in the middle. You know, maybe not in the middle of the painting, but it was right in front. And what that did is immediately, it's a proximity thing. It was, the viewer realizes that pole's right in front of me. And so all the rest of that stuff just receded into the depths. Don't you think?
Yeah,
and so that's a perfect example.
I felt it needed a strong
You know?
vertical because there were so many horizontals in the piece.
Yeah.
And I thought if I put a vertical there, I wasn't meaning that should be the interest, but just to
but
strengthen
it
my
made you go
horizontals.
around
But
it.
I think
Yeah.
it also creates that proximity thing, which means that it was all part of the Gestalt
Right.
of the piece. And it actually enhanced that painting, I think, because as the viewer, I'm recognizing where I stand in reality
Right.
to the painting.
Yeah, that's good.
See?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Well,
Yeah.
then, all right, so you're talking about that.
Yeah.
You remember the piece of the Monet's, the Grand Canal? That
Yes,
you
and
copied?
it's
It's got this huge dark pole right in the
That's
not in the centre,
similar.
but it's and you were wondering why would Monet put this dark pole right in
Exactly.
that spot, because obviously it was the right spot for it, and perhaps he was thinking the same thing, that he needed to be able to, because of the atmosphere in the painting, maybe he needed something to help the buildings in the distance
And
to recede even more.
Exactly, and to create that 3-dimensional space.
Yeah.
Actually, this Hibbard does the same thing by having those
Oh, yeah.
gondolas right in the front
Yeah.
and the big poles in front, and
Yeah.
then you see down. You get the depth
Yeah.
in that piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
That's interesting. I knew these guys would be putting these big dark poles in for some reason. They
Well-
were just sticking them in there for no
Well,
apparent reason.
I think some people get thrown off when you use the word Gestalt. But it was interesting this summer. My nephew is married to a wonderful German girl. So we decided to ask her, since it's a German word, what is the definition? Well, she was there with her twin brother and a friend of the brothers. And they all just sort of, that's a big thought. You know, how do we put that into words or to context? And Lena said it meant family.
Yeah.
And she sort of specifically said that would be the northern German understanding or
family is
dialect.
the whole.
The whole.
not
The
the
unit.
But when you think about
The
it,
form.
it is the form
Right.
or shape of something.
The
And it's a wonderful
relationship.
way that,
Yeah.
because everybody would have a different personality, everybody would be
Yeah.
different, but there would be something to hold them together.
Is
So I thought it was a
family.
really
Yeah.
a nice way of describing.
Love that.
The friend of theirs said it's body and soul.
Yes.
And you can't have soul without body or body without soul. It's body and soul together as Gestalt.
Yeah,
and he
to
had
make
thought
the whole.
about it because we surprised him with this. It was just a picnic or a cookout, drinking beer and eating a hamburger, and here we are talking about Gestalt. I mean, but it was interesting
No,
how
it's
they
funny.
took it seriously and give us a good answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, as artists, you understand what you have to do to create a composition, a design on the canvas. As teachers, how would you teach students to understand Gestalt?
Well, the reason why I like different terms in painting, because you never know what could trigger this person's imagination
agree
or
with
creative process. And I find that different painters have different ways of talking about the same thing. So in Gestalt, it would be unity. You know, it might be the oneness, the wholeness of your painting. It has to say and feel the one thing that you were trying to start. Even though
Right.
it took you 4 or 5 hours, or maybe 20 hours to complete the piece, it can't lose that first thought that you had when you decided to go down that path. Because I'm sure if in your mind's eye, you envisioned the whole thing, and it was there. And then it was up to you to figure out how to put that onto the canvas. That's always the tricky
Also,
part.
I might say that the Gestalt signifies meaning in your painting. So another way of speaking to students is to say, can you keep the meaning that you wanted in your painting? Can you like as you started this piece, and we teach outdoors. So as you started this piece outdoors, even though the light changed and all this other stuff, can you still say that when you look at your canvas, there's a meaning that you wanted to, a message, like a message that you wanted to evoke, and it still stays the same.
Yeah. Okay, unless anybody's got anything they want to add, can you believe that our time is up?
Oh, very good.
But I don't want to cut you off in your prime if you were wanting to say something there.
No, wouldn't
I
was just thinking that if somebody had come up
David's
with me
in his prime.
to 38.
I like it.
We're all the same age.
Yeah.
So, I think if somebody came to me and David, I'm a big fan of the Boston Marathon, could you do a painting to talk, runners? So the first thing I would do is go out and make quick little sketches of running and try to figure out how they look in the gesture of running and ways I could design a gesture. And that would be first. And that's in a sense saying that's also last, right? Because the gesture has to be there in the end. I might get all the anatomy correct, and
That's
you can
right.
identify the figure by the what he looks like or she looks like, but it's that gesture and that movement that triggered the whole idea of painting the marathon. That for the artist, and I'm sure for the viewer, would be the same. So it's one of those things where you're going to start off with a couple quickie, sketchy lines, but those quick, sketchy lines have to be there in the end as well, which is a good way of. I think Connie explained the Gestalt that way. Is that from beginning to end there has to be a Gestalt.
Wholeness.
As wholeness as you're creating the painting, and that's something the beginner might struggle with, but eventually as they go along, and I think that sort of brings us into our next subject, right? Spontaneity and painting, yeah.
But that's for next week.
All right, next week.
You're getting
Sorry.
Okay, well, our time's up. Thank you very much for listening. For those of you who came in halfway through, we were just talking about the Gestalt theory in art. And it comes down to the fact that Gestalt is one of the most powerful tools that's available to the artist for creating unity in their painting. And so maybe David and Connie will come up with a Gestalt workshop for next year. And for those of you who would like to know a bit more about it, stay tuned. So until next week, thank you for listening, and we'll be back.